Hello everyone, and welcome to the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Broadcasting Services Act. MCHELLE, Rowland is here with us, and I think quite a number of us know about MCHELLE, but let me say that she's got a very impressive both professional and parliamentary record. She was Shadow Minister for Citizenship and Multiculturalism, Shadow Minister for Small Business, and currently Shadow Minister for Communications. She's also had a number of executive positions in the public sector and elsewhere. Interestingly, her interest in multiculturalism, small business and communications are of direct relevance to community television. Why? Because Channel 31, as we all know, caters for cultural diversity with more than 20 language groups participating in our programming. Small business, it's the area where we derived our revenue, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And communications, because it's the portfolio in the federal government that is directly responsible for Channel 31 up to the period that we hold the free-to-air license. Now, community broadcasting, together with the national and commercial broadcasting, constitute the three pillars of the Broadcasting Services Act. So community television is listed in the Act. It's not something that, you know, came out of nowhere. CTV, I'll call community television CTV. CTV, in contrast with community radio, has received very little government funding and support. Despite this, we have managed to survive, and here in Melbourne, I could say thrive, with a recent annual turnover of $2.5 million from sponsorships and airtime fees. Unfortunately, in 2014, the federal government decided not to renew Channel 31's free-to-air license, directing CTV into becoming an online broadcaster by the end of 2015. The then Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, argued that the government needed the FTA spectrum for testing the MPEG-4 new technology, and that Channel 31 would be more successful as an online broadcaster. Two things. Both of these claims have been proven wrong. The tests were not really required, at least until now, and Channel 31 was almost made bankrupt with a significant loss of advertising or sponsorship revenue as a result of the announced imminent loss of the free-to-air. Thousands of Channel 31 volunteers and supporters opposed the loss of the FTA and advocated that we should embrace the online-only status at the same time as other broadcasters. We recognise the impact of the digital disruption and the rapidly changing media habits of our viewers. However, as a lean community broadcaster that receives negligent funding from the government for our operations, we knew that it would require several years to re-establish a social enterprise that would enable us to operate in the new and very challenging online environment. The numerous extensions we have been granted since 2016 prove how wrong the initial government decision was to force us out of the FTA within a short period of time. CTV is still very valuable complement to the commercial and national media, as it encourages ordinary people to participate in the media and to have a voice. People living with disability, cultural diverse groups, at-risk youth and other minorities are keen to continue to fund their own programs on Channel 31, and they put in many hours of voluntary work every week in order to empower their communities and give them the opportunity to participate in the rapidly emerging digital revolution, if I can call it that. We continue to reach 1.5 million unique viewers in Melbourne and Geelong every month. We are not resisting change. We merely wish to be given adequate time and resources to adjust and succeed in the new environment. Unfortunately, the sudden announcement that we would lose our FTA has threatened our viability, and if it was not for the philanthropic sector recognizing the important contribution we make to social well-being, Channel 31 would not have survived. We are grateful to Senator Xenophon for his recent actions to prolong our FTA life, and we're also very pleased with the initiative, MCHELLE, to consult with the community on this very important issue. Thank you also for the leadership you are showing in relation to community television, and we are optimistic that in the next few months you will be able to develop a strategy or a position paper or policy paper that would maintain community television along the lines of community radio. There seems to be an unexplained discrepancy here. There are two branches of community broadcasting. One is radio and the other is television, and online is something that emerges in between those. Community radio has the privilege of some $17 million, and that's good. They deserve it. But what about community television? Don't they deserve $1, $2, $3, $4 million? Somehow government has got it wrong, and it's important that we rectified it. We are very hopeful that you might be the person that does that. Thank you very much. We haven't invited a lot of people because this was meant to be a meeting of the board of Channel 31 and a few members, but these people present here have got a lot of connections that will pass on the information to those who are not present. Thank you. Yeah, I should have asked you.
I firstly want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Thank you, Mike, for that very generous introduction and the very relevant linkages that you have made with respect to community broadcasting and community television in particular. You make some very salient points about the Broadcasting Services Act that's just clicked over 25 years. It's great to be here in Melbourne this fine evening, and thank you so much for so many people for turning out for what I think is an important discussion that we need to have. Thank you very much to Channel 31 for hosting me, for the advice of your General Manager Matt Field in conceiving it, for the hard work of the staff of Channel 31 and their dedicated team of young volunteers in setting everything up. I was once a young volunteer. Your efforts are sincerely appreciated, and thank you very much for being here. And thank you also to RMIT and those of you representing RMIT for hosting us here on campus tonight. For the benefit of those watching us on the live stream, RMITV is the student-run television production house here at RMIT. It has a long history of producers and practitioners moving into professional employment in the industry. The alumni of RMITV include Rove McManus, Peter Hellier, Hamish and Andy, Merrick Watts and Tim Ross, Nazim Hussain, Waleed Ali, Shona Devlin and Tom Ballard, just to mention a few. A very impressive roll call. RMITV has also had crew members go to work at the ABC, Network 10, VideoWorks, Ozstage, Staging Connections and many more. Tomorrow I'm going to appear at the conference of Commercial Radio Australia, an industry that has benefited so greatly from the talent and innovation nurtured in and by the community broadcasting sector in Australia, so it's only fitting that I'm here tonight. It's great to be here not only to meet with you, to speak and hear about the many and varied activities being undertaken here in Melbourne, but also because of the simple fact that you are indeed, as Mike said, still here. So, why a community TV forum now? It's timely. Over the last few months in particular, the staff of my office and I have been in contact with representatives of the community television sector across the country, with Channel 31 in Melbourne, Channel 44 in Adelaide, WTV in Perth, to discuss community television in Australia. We found it extremely useful to have people like Mike and Matt Field to share ideas with, and that's why we're here. In Parliament, I have made representations on behalf of the sector to extend the licence period for community TV, and in general, I've been thinking about the role of broadcasting and community broadcasting in the 21st century, a time of great transformation for the media industry as a whole. This time last week, indeed Thursday, the 5th of October, marked the 25th anniversary of the commencement of the main provisions of the Broadcasting Services Act 1992. The Act, as Mike rightly pointed out, contains a number of provisions crafted to promote diversity and to maintain competitive tensions in a market that would otherwise be characterised by consolidation. These provisions serve diversity both in terms of the structure of the broadcasting sector as well as the content it provides. For example, on the structural side, the Act creates different categories of broadcasting services. So we have a diversity in the type of broadcasting services in Australia, a mix of commercial, subscription, community and national broadcasters, for example. In addition, the Act contains provisions on who can control our media. So we have diversity at the level of ownership and control and a number of distinct media voices in different areas. Community radio and community television play an important role in meeting the objectives of the Broadcasting Services Act, and it's worthwhile revisiting some of those. Promoting the diversity of broadcasting services available to the Australian public, developing and reflecting Australian identity, character and cultural diversity, and providing programming that is locally significant. And over 25 years, advances in technology have led to the switch off of analogue television and the advent of digital multi-channelling. Nowadays, we have many more broadcasting channels, yet the decision was taken by Malcolm Turnbull, as Minister at the time, that we should have less services. 25 years later, we see the Turnbull government actively dismantling the diversity safeguards we have, with no plan for adapting our regulatory framework or diversity safeguards to 21st century conditions. And I do want to say something about media diversity because it's important for community television and it's important for the sector as a whole and, quite frankly, our democracy. It's at this point in our history, it's my strong opinion that media diversity is under attack in Australia. Media diversity is a key issue in the communications portfolio. Indeed, it is fundamental to our very identity as a nation, to our level of social cohesion, as well as the proper functioning of our democracy. I can assure you that Labor is very much aware of these issues. We see broadcasting in the context of society at large, a society that comprises digital natives and early adopters, as well as people who might not go online very much at all, whether because they don't know how to, they can't afford to, or they don't have decent internet connectivity, for example. People of different ages, abilities and means, of different languages and ethnicities. Whatever the reasons, there are many communities for whom the ubiquitous, stable and free broadcast platform remains vital. But it's not just communities who are on the wrong side of the digital divide for whom this is the case. Indeed, for the majority of Australians today, it is the traditional media, commercial TV, commercial radio and newspapers that remain the main source of news and current affairs that's consumed. And it's a well-known fact that Australia already has one of the most concentrated media markets in the world. Yet this government has recently taken at least 3 key steps to weaken and undermine what little media diversity we have left. Firstly, we've got the decision by Malcolm Turnbull to kick community TV off the air, sending it to an over-the-top delivery model without giving the sector enough time to make the transition. This was a step to wipe a distinct local voice from the television broadcasting mix entirely, a diminution in diversity in our broadcasting services. Secondly, the decision by Malcolm Turnbull, again as Communications Minister and then as Prime Minister, to cut the budgets of our national broadcasters, the ABC and the SBS, to meddle in their charters, and now to appease Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party to menace the ABC and SBS with a competitive neutrality inquiry. This is a step to weaken and undermine the strength of the voice of the national broadcasters, trusted broadcasters, which add much needed diversity to our media mix. And thirdly, most recently, the Turnbull government's changes to Australia's media ownership and control laws, specifically the repeal of the 2 out of 3 cross-media control rule. This rule prevents a person from controlling all 3 media platforms out of commercial TV, commercial radio and associated newspapers in any one licence area in order to promote diversity by preventing any one voice from becoming too powerful or dominant. The repeal of this rule is going through Parliament now. It has passed the House and the Senate and is expected to return for final passage in the sittings next week. Now, whatever your views on the repeal of this rule may be, you cannot deny that it is designed to allow media consolidation. Taken together, the media ownership changes, the plans to undermine the public broadcasters and the government's mess of a community TV policy represent a direct assault on media diversity in Australia, an assault that has huge implications for our democracy and our culture. So I want to move to community broadcasting today, and it's for these reasons that community broadcasting, including community television broadcasting, is as important as ever. In the face of media consolidation by commercial media companies, the distinct and local content provided by community TV has even greater value. Malcolm Turnbull first announced the plan to send community television over the top to an online-only distribution model in September 2014, saying that online would be the best outcome for community TV. Now I note, and I'm sure you do as well, that the NBN rollout has not progressed to a stage that makes migration of audience and sponsors a straightforward proposition. Many Australians do not have NBN services available and do not have an active connection or do not have the internet download speeds required for a satisfactory viewing experience. All the same, in the time since, community TV operators have been working very hard to make the best of the situation that was thrust upon them, operating under great uncertainty as the deadline for switch-off looms and is extended at the 11th hour time after time. And Mike has noted the impact of these decisions. Look, community TV stations, they aren't toasters. There are consequences of turning them on and off, of having that uncertainty. And as Mike highlighted, the implications for sponsorship have been immense. All of the stations have made difficult decisions to reduce staff and expenditure and work to develop new sources of income in anticipation of a reduction in revenue that comes with the transition to the online model. Just as the commercial broadcasters and the national broadcasters are, community television broadcasters have launched websites and apps. Community TV is using the broadcast platform to drive audiences to their online offerings and using the online offerings to build new audiences. They are exploring new revenue streams. They are working with platforms like YouTube and Facebook to promote their content. While some community TV licences have been handed back, others valiantly continue to operate and work through technical difficulties and the challenge of migrating their audiences and sponsors online. As a research report from the Parliamentary Library published in 2014 stated, and I quote, "Community media contributes significantly to the pool of media voices available. Survival is difficult for broadcasting community media because they most often operate on small budgets, operating largely as a result of support from the communities they serve." And I want to acknowledge that I know there are representatives from many of those communities here tonight. As I said in Parliament when making representations to government to extend broadcasting licences earlier this year, these passionate members of the community simply want to keep going. What they need most is time. To finish, the media is in transition. Things are changing, but some things remain the same. Online platforms and new technologies have fundamentally altered audience consumption patterns and business models in the media sector. However, the broadcast platform continues to enjoy its strength as a ubiquitous, free, stable, mass platform. The internet coexists alongside broadcasting. Broadcasters of all categories almost always have an online presence as well. Indeed, broadcasters are inextricably linked with technology platforms like Google and Facebook to help get their content out to audiences. It is not a question of whether broadcasters deliver content over the broadcast platform or the internet. They need to do both, and they do both. The government is about to repeal the 2 out of 3 cross-media ownership rule and allow commercial media companies to consolidate even further. And I think this action actually strengthens the case for community television. It strengthens it. At this point now more than ever, Australians need strong and vibrant public broadcasters and community TV and radio broadcasters across platforms to ensure that diversity in our media voices. So now is indeed the time to reimagine the role of community television broadcasting. I look forward to hearing your questions, but most of all, your ideas. As Mike said, this is an important part of policy development. Labor is formulating its policies in this area. Community television is a vital policy that will be developed. The best way in order to have a relevant policy in this area is to consult and is to listen. That's the key reason why I'm here today, and I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and thanks for your ongoing passion and interest and support of community TV. It's really appreciated. And thanks, Mike, and thanks to the C31 family for coming along tonight, and hello to everyone in Facebook land. My name's Brendan. I'm a digital manager at Channel 31. I'd also like to acknowledge and honour the First Nations peoples and pay respect to elders past and present as custodians of this land. I'm going to speak to you very briefly before we take some questions about some of the challenges and the opportunities that are presented by the transition to online, and touch on why, as Michelle said, TV is still such an important and crucial aspect of this transition. As we all know, the media landscape is changing quickly and dramatically, but reports of the death of TV have been greatly exaggerated. It's still a vital platform for Channel 31. It's our identity. It is who we are. We are Melbourne and Geelong. You've heard that tagline. Sure, we can connect with global audiences online and around the world now, but our identity is a hyper-local Melbourne local TV station. That's crucial to the relevance of our content, and it's unique, and it's vital moving forward as part of this transition. Mike and Michelle touched on changing compression formats and technologies, and that means that there is simply no reason to take community TV off the air. There is spectrum enough for us all. And you just have to look globally to changing technology and how that has opened up opportunities. If you look at the UK and the community TV model there, where there are now more than 20 local TV stations broadcasting over the internet, yes, but also via local TV and connecting with audiences that way. We see the TV broadcast platform as vital to connecting with audiences who, as Michelle said, still prefer to use that platform as their number one way to watch content. Older audiences, various diverse community groups, many people still have TVs in their lounge rooms, believe it or not, and will do for many years to come. But as Mike said, we're under no illusions. The world is changing, of course, but we think that TV is crucial to driving people from old media to new, to helping to transition viewers of all ages and from all backgrounds. And we're using the TV to drive audiences not just to our own official C31 online platforms, but also to the social media accounts and the websites and the online initiatives of our huge and diverse network of producers. That is the real strength of C31, the dedicated volunteers and producers and their audiences and sponsors who contribute so much to Australia's media landscape. We're doing this with our producers, but also for our own online initiatives. We're now regularly broadcasting live to Facebook, like we are tonight, and to TV, simulcasting local sports, arts, events, festivals, things like the RecLink Community Cup and local comedy, initiatives and media content that just doesn't get a look in on commercial and mainstream media. Another important initiative, a multi-platform initiative that I'd just like to touch on briefly, we've just launched called Project 1 Million. Check it out at project1million.org if you haven't seen it already. We've partnered with local filmmakers at YouthWorks, digital marketers at Loud Days, and also charities including Amnesty International, The Long Walk, Children's Ground and All Together Now to produce a video campaign to tackle racism head-on. We're producing stories that celebrate and share the diversity and the human spirit that binds us all as Australians. And we're using TV, social media marketing and also crowdfunding to take these really important stories of social cohesion into the news feeds and the lounge rooms of Australians from all walks of life. That's just one project, a big, complex project that we've been working on for the best part of 12 months, but that's just one project. As you know, in a multi-platform world with shrinking budgets, it is a complex transition to handle. Projects like this aren't easy to deploy. There are many parties involved, government regulators, technology providers, funding bodies, commercial sponsors, audiences, producers, volunteers, not to mention the different audiences and the way that they engage with content on various platforms. And that content needs to be optimised and distributed and edited in different ways, whether it's on TV or Snapchat. This complexity is why all government really need to get behind Channel 31 and community TV more broadly at this crucial time. TV is who we are. It is extremely relevant and will continue to be so for many years. And as Michelle and Mike have both said, we don't need to be using one or the other. We need to be distributing content in many different ways and on many different platforms. And local TV throughout Melbourne and Geelong is still absolutely vital for that. We're supporting content creators and viewers and producers and sponsors from all walks of life to make this transition, but it won't happen overnight. It's a complex process and one that we really need to get behind. As we know, there's a real lack of quality, locally made Australian content, journalism in particular. And Channel 31 and Community TV provides a platform for the next generation of content creators to hone their craft, to find their audiences and really add to Australia's media landscape. So thanks, Michelle, again for your support, and we hope everyone listening will get behind Community TV and allow us to have some more time to go online. Thank you. I think we are going to take a few questions now. There's a microphone over here, so maybe we'll share that around. Feel free to ask some questions to Michelle.
Michelle, Channel 31's a consortium, but also many small groups. Like we're actually hundreds of groups. We've got the Russian, Spanish is a big group, really small groups also, you know, groups wanting to start up. But unfortunately over the last 2 years we've even lost some of the smallest groups. So there's these problems with TV and ratings and numbers and sponsors, and of course the small groups can't attract big numbers, but we still want to service them. We still want them to have a show, but we've lost a lot. Is there anything that you see could develop in the future to help some of our smaller groups through us, but help them, you know, I don't know, maybe with CBF type radio funding, or there's quite a lot that can be done. We've lost a few over the last 2 years, naturally. You know, it's been a shocking time. And they all need similar things, but also they all need to be out there in their communities too, making the programs. Is there any small funding or any other way that you know, you can help us to help our smallest ethnic groups?
Sure. It'd be useful to understand, when you say you've lost some of those groups, whether it's because of that uncertainty or whether it's because some of it might have been natural attrition that was maybe sped up as a result of the online platform. Because I think I'll make 2 points. Firstly, as many people in this room would know, volunteerism, while in Australia it's very strong, it's often very difficult to maintain that level of interest by people of different groups, you know, for extended periods of time. So that's often one of the reasons why you have people falling away. But if they're falling away because of a second issue, which is because they don't think that they are valued by government, then that becomes a serious issue. Look, government needs to have an expression of value of community broadcasting, and in particular community television. I must say that, you know, and I'm not saying this purely to be partisan, I'm happy to be corrected by anyone here, I don't see a statement of value that's been articulated by this government when it comes to this pillar of the Broadcasting Services Act. I don't see that value. So I think one of the most important things in developing policy in this area is to understand, I think, 3 things. Firstly, regardless of the way in which the media landscape is changing, content will always be king. Secondly, there's that point about diversity that I make there. And you only have diversity when you have those people actually wanting to be involved and actually maintaining their involvement, because that's how you obtain the different voices. And thirdly, look, how do you encourage that diversity and how do you have that content? It does require money, because you'll have the level of volunteers, but you still have to run. Still have to run the show. So I think in that sense, it would be a very useful exercise to examine how public funding for content is being done in Australia, and we've got this content conversation and this content review that's being undertaken at the moment. I will be very interested to see what sort of recommendations come out from that specifically go to issues of community television, and I haven't seen any reports, which probably isn't surprising, but I haven't seen any reports that specifically go to that. I've seen more of the focus being on how the free-to-air networks can have their regulation, some of their regulation undone, more than anything else. But I think that content conversation definitely needs to include community television. It's one that I will be acutely looking out for. But your point is very well made about the smaller groups, how many there are, and that's C31, let alone the others that we've had before. I might end on this point. If those groups aren't participating now, then where are they going? And I think that is a real shame that we have had that diminution of voices, because, you know, the point has been made. You get the proliferation of people with different views on social media. You know, the question becomes, does that proliferation mean that you're getting a diversity of news and current affairs? Probably not. But certainly what you are getting through having such a wide variety and large scale of people who are interested in community television, you are getting that diversity of content, because they are diverse people who want to see diverse things. So yeah, your point is well made. So thank you very much. I'm happy to have comments as well as questions, I should say, because I'm here to listen more than anything else as well.
Yeah, I just say something about when I come here 4 years ago, and maybe many other people coming before me in Victoria, they say to the people who come even to learn English and all that sort of thing, keep your language, keep your culture, keep your folklore, keep your everything. Because that thing they give you, as you mentioned before, diversity, and also those, my children, my grandchildren, they will keep the language, they can keep the contact overseas, and they know that is what happened with the people I come from Chile, they connecting from Chile. Now we have Victoria representative in Chile, doing business with them. And there are many other big business, they doing that. So even Victoria, against to other states, even at the federal level, they have an act, multicultural act, that they protect the diversity, they protect the language, the culture. So how this Victorian government behind this act, they cannot give you support, even at the federal level to the community TV. In this case, I asking about the community TV that they were the foundation of the Channel 31, many ethnic group, because they formed regional group. There were community TV, South, North, East, West, but also they were Spanish, Italian, Greek, Maltese. They were all those still doing program for Channel 31 in Melbourne. So that is Channel 31 in Melbourne. I think it was one of the best as a model to the other, because they were really community and they were just get funding by the sponsor. So all this year they didn't receive no one sent from the government, federal government or state government. Maybe sometime they give you, but the really key thing is the Channel 31 was a model. I think they should keep it for all other states.
No, thank you very much, sir. I guess just in response to your comments, which I take completely on board, it's interesting talking about the different cultures that make Australia great. And I think too often these days we have people who are very ready, public leaders who are very ready to talk about multiculturalism, but when it comes to actually putting that into action, they're hard to find. They're hard to find when it comes to putting that into action. Your point about Victoria and some other states having multicultural acts, we don't have one. There isn't one federally called a Multiculturalism Act, and quite frankly, we've been working quite hard in Labor to keep the Racial Discrimination Act and some of those main provisions. But what I take from your comments, sir, is it's one thing for politicians to talk about multiculturalism and how we're a great multicultural nation. You need to actually back that up with some proper policy action. So your point is very well made. Thank you.
My name's Katie. So we often hear about the success stories of, big personalities like Rove and Hamish and Andy and many others that have come from community TV. But just as important as a pathway and experience of that community TV provides to young and up-and-coming journalists, how important do you believe that community TV is to the continued strength and quality of the Australian journalism landscape?
That's an excellent question, Katie. I think it's imperative. I think it's imperative for those reasons that I gave about diversity in terms of content, but also diversity in terms of ownership. And the regulator themselves, I believe it was the regulator who did a study that showed, as I alluded to earlier, the proliferation of people who are ready to comment and give comments in 140 characters or whatever doesn't necessarily expand on the diversity of opinions that we have. I think it's a real misnomer, and I've argued this in terms of the media reform debate, just to say, you know, the internet means anyone can have their comment these days. Look, I think it's much deeper than that. We did have what I thought at the time to be quite a useful inquiry being undertaken by the Senate into public interest journalism, and that was supposed to be the vehicle by which we were able to have a look at media diversity, what constitutes journalism. I don't even think it got to the stage where it could actually define what a journalist is these days, because the definition seems to be so fluid. That should have been a piece of evidence that was taken into account before we had this piece of legislation put before the Parliament, but that's all history now. But I couldn't agree with you more, Katie, that it is so important for the quality of that content production, people who are ready to ask the questions and learn their craft through that avenue. So, yeah, couldn't agree with you more.
Simple question. There is two companies broadcasting, SBS and ABC. They both government channels. Channel ABC has 4 channels, and channel SBS as well 4 TV channels. Could you take one of them for channel 31? Is this in your possibility or not? Can you do it or you can't? Can you do discussion in Parliament about position of Channel 31 now? What's happened? It's everybody understands that it's wrong. That is not multicultural policy. It's not supporting people with no English language school, no elderly people, disabled people, multicultural background. So who should explain this? Have you got a session on Parliament when you can talk to the Minister of the Communication who is now in power? Yep. Another thing, we already for 25 years on air, we changed 5 or 6 Prime Minister of Australia. Maybe it's time to change another one and to continue working as Channel 31 as a community television. Thank you.
Okay. Well, so yes, thank you. I think you're getting some a round of applause there. Yeah, I would very much like to change Prime Minister, but my position on that is well known. But so to your 2 points, firstly about the first part about what opportunities are there to undertake this questioning. We actually have a process called Senate estimates that you might have heard of. It's where the opposition, where the non-government parties actually have the opportunity to question the minister and all government departments in various policy areas. That's actually coming up in a couple of weeks. And what I would like to do, and I'll do it through Matt and others who are here, I'm very happy to have some questions put to the Minister and the Department on the issues that are raised here tonight. And the beauty of that is they actually have to answer those questions. They mightn't end up being purely verbal answers that are done live, but we can certainly also put them what we call on notice, so they can have written questions and we get written answers back. So I'll liaise with C31 about that and make sure that we get that in. Your question about the public broadcasters and allocation of spectrum and where they sit. Look, I completely understand where you're coming from. At the same time, I think it's important to reiterate that we don't want the I think it would be unhealthy, sir, for the non-commercial broadcasting sectors to start really looking at one another and where they could possibly for example, if you're suggesting one of SBS or ABC lose one of their multi-channels, you would not want that to be. I don't think that whatever community TV gets should be at the expense of our public broadcasters. We need to ensure that we have that diversity, including in the non-commercial television space. But I completely understand your point because, and this goes to the very remarks that I was making in Parliament, there is spectrum available. That spectrum isn't being currently occupied for the purposes that the government claims. So it's still capable of being used. So I think that is the avenue that I think is the lowest hanging fruit. That is the one in which we can prosecute most readily. And the reason for that is because it is fact. Unless someone comes along and says we've got a plan ready to start testing in this space that's currently occupied by community TV, then that argument that the spectrum needs to go somewhere else, that argument is defunct. And we know that argument that's being made is defunct. So I think you're very correct to say that we should be looking at the uses and allocation of spectrum, and I think that we should be concentrating on the fact that no one else is currently seeking to get, like I don't see any petitions going to the government, I don't see any announcements from the government about exactly what they are going to do with that spectrum now and why it needs to go now. Yester.
Hi, I've got some questions here on the Facebook live stream.
Sure.
So the first one is from Warren from WTV in Perth. He asks, why do you think the government wants community TV off the broadcast spectrum?
That's probably a good question for me to put to them. Look, all I can suggest to that answer is peering into the evidence that we've got before us in terms of diversity, in terms of what the government's done in this area. I just don't think that there isn't that value given by this government to the various pillars of the Broadcasting Services Act that ensure diversity of content and diversity of ownership. I think diversity for them is an outdated term. They like to, just as they were calling the cross-media ownership rules archaic, stuck in the past, etc. Again, it's this notion that the internet means that we've got all the diversity we need. You can have the internet sitting there. How does that guarantee diversity? It's what's actually done with it. And you actually need, shock horror, you need humans, like people with creative minds, people with time, people with different backgrounds to actually want to make use of that spectrum and of that space to be creative people. So I guess my short answer, peering into the mind of the government, is that this doesn't register as a key value that's fundamental to pluralism, fundamental to some of the key tenets of our democracy.
Next question is from James, and it says, if the Labor Party wins the next election, will Labor provide funding to community TV stations?
Well, again, one of the reasons why I'm here tonight, to find out what we actually need. And it's undeniable that one of your key issues here is about funding, because that's an area that's taken a particularly big hit. I can say two things. Firstly, I can assure you that Labor values community television. Secondly, I think the fact that we've had this turnout on a Thursday night when you could be out doing a lot of other things enables me to take back to my team that this is a valued element, a valued pillar of the Broadcasting Services Act. And so as we formulate our policy in this area, at least I've got that weight of evidence behind us as well. So that's what I can assure James, that we'll be happy to keep prosecuting. So, Warren. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Angie Black from La Trobe Uni. I'm just curious as to how much research has actually been done to back up the claims that online's a viable way to go, because the small amount of research we've done is that 72 hours of content is uploaded to the web every minute, and somebody's got to curate that content because it's not possible to watch it all. So, you know, it's obvious that there is a role to play for online, but the role that community service community television is playing at the moment is that it's got a captured audience, it's got a captured market that is online, as well as being broadcast, and it just seems to be interesting that that this thing of the web will answer all the questions, when we know from the small amount of research that we've done that when we broadcast our program, we get between 3,000 to 5,000 views whilst broadcast. When we upload it online, we're lucky to get 100 viewers. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious whether somebody else has done some research to see whether or not that's actually a viable option to put things online.
No, I haven't seen that research, and maybe you would know more than me in this area, Angie. Like, when the decision was made, was any research provided to community TV that you're aware of to demonstrate that? Again, I think that's, yeah, look, I think here I am, I'm formulating questions for the Minister. He's got them well and truly on notice now. But, I'm a person who, I'm a lawyer in a past life, and it's evidence-based. Policy should be evidence-based. And I don't believe that the evidence has been there for the changes that the government's done. I have done quite a bit of research through the Parliamentary Library, and there's not a great deal there. I don't know whether the regulator has done this research and simply not released it. But indeed, I think these are all questions that need to be asked, because again, talk. Yeah.
Somebody provides us with some money.
Look, it's research. It's chicken and the egg, isn't it? Because so many decisions are being made in the absence of that evidentiary base, and when you do that, then that is really where you start to undermine those fundamental tenets. Like, the objects of the Broadcasting Services Act weren't just dreamed up. Like, they were devised with a mind to the kind of Australia that we wanted, to progress into the future. And simply by making decisions that aren't based on sound evidence, that are based purely on either fiscal or ideological decisions, I think is a recipe for disaster.
We did a little evidence, little research in the northern suburbs, and cost is a factor for the smaller and impoverished communities, of cost of downloads.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's one of the things they don't think about. $80 a week per month. And that's really a social barrier.
Well, that's an aspect on which research has been done. We've had organisations such as Telstra do very detailed research into digital inclusion, and Choice has done quite a bit of research showing that communications costs are actually now right up there when it comes to costs of utilities. People are sometimes far more prepared to pay their data or their voice bills first, so they keep that access. Like, as an essential piece of infrastructure, communications rates right up there. And secondly, we know for a fact, judging from even if you take the complaints to the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman, people aren't getting what they paid for with their internet services. And again, all these presumptions about going over the top assume that there will be a certain level of connectivity that will be affordable and will be reliable. And that simply isn't happening across Australia, and that divide is ever more present and getting worse when it comes to certain cohorts, not only for different incomes, but also for people of different age groups as well.
We have a lot of country cousins that we broadcast to, and so we find it very difficult, the proposal of not having free-to-air community TV, because a lot of them can't afford to have expensive communication programs going through. A lot of them don't have mobile apps that they can use, or get onto the free content.
Yes, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that assumption about connectivity will simply magically appear. But you need that connectivity in order to drive that online accessibility. And for so many people, it simply doesn't exist.
We just have time for a few more quick questions, guys. Janosch?
It's not going to be too quick, but I try to make it as fast as I can. So I've been here for 10 years now, and first I was able to work for SBS Radio, which is one of the multicultural streamlines and present media. And now I'm working for the Hungarian community television. It's been for 5 years with them. I've been 5 years with them, and I'm coming with probably 30 years of background of making content. So that's my question is coming from that side, that no one actually mentioned the content of the importance of the content, what we can see on Channel 31 or what we can see on different kind of media platforms, because that's my problem since I've been here in Australia. I was really touched by by Australian possibility or opportunity that was given by SBS Radio, because at least you can actually use the mix of media representing your language, but representing the Australian issues in a sense, as it comes together somehow. So what I can feel that, and we know that the census already was done 4 or 5 years ago, and all the small groups like the Hungarian, the Lithuanian, and maybe the Russian group was decreased from SBS radio programs. So out of 4 programs, we went down to 2. And suddenly we became again decreased by the government when Channel 31 had to close their doors. So it's, I mean, not yet, but it's going to happen, or it's not going to happen. I don't know. It's really an uncertainty. So we are losing our audience slowly. We are talking about older people mainly who are emigrated. But the biggest migration wave happened, if you are talking about the Hungarians, in 1956. So we are talking about 70, 80 years old people who are not able. They integrated themselves into the Australian community, but not as strong that they are actually can maintain a conversation with doctors, with lawyers about their will and how to discuss about these kind of situations. So there are heaps of questions that they are interested in, and they can't listen to the radio anymore. They are not able to listen to the community TV. But what I'd like to tell in here, that there is the second generation, the third generation, and the fourth generation of the Hungarians who are very good in English, of course, and they try to maintain the Hungarian, because Hungarian is one of the VCE subjects that is choosable right now. But probably if you are trying to emphasize your daughters, sons, and your granddaughters, as the Spanish I'd like to emphasize them to maintain your native language or whatever. You can't, because they are going to ask us why. What's the reason? Because it's not going to be choosable anymore in VCA, because sooner or later, there is no radio programs in Hungarian, there is no TV program in Hungarian, and SBS is announcing all the time that they are proud of multiculturalism. And I remember 10 years ago, I was able to see documentaries from Spain, from Argentina, from everywhere, Indonesia, from Hungary, in their own native language. Not anymore in SBS. And slowly we are losing our multicultural faces. As if you are really like to talk to the young generation who inherited heaps of multicultural backgrounds from everywhere from the world, they're ready to maintain their heritage, even with their language, with their dance, with their other culture that they are brought up, but they can't actually use that anymore, because there is no such a platform that they can share it, because the mainstream media is not interested anymore. Like I have lots of friends who actually were born in Australia. They can speak Hungarian with a very particular way. It's not as fluent as you would expect, but still they can speak Hungarian. And they probably would be happy to share their knowledge in channels, at the platform of Channels 31 or SBS or wherever, but they hardly any chance to do so. And this is so the question is that finally we got the point. So the question is there any chance to approach either the current government or the next government that the content is going to be really important, that these kind of channels or media can only support, that the faces of the Australian multicultural platform is that because of that small groups or bigger groups came or arrived or emigrated to Australia, and if they'd really like to keep these faces as an ongoing sort of facade, that they really need to maintain the background of this media as well. You know what I mean?
I understand exactly what you mean, Janosch, and I can assure you that I'm very aware of it. You know, as someone who aspires to be the communications minister, I'm very aware of it, and I understand exactly what you're saying about the SBS and their radio census that they do, and they completed their last one only recently. I, for example, represent an area of Western Sydney where I've got some very new emerging communities from the subcontinent, but I've also got a lot of really older communities, particularly Maltese. Now, gradually, over time, they had some, and they only get a couple of hours a week. This is what I think a lot of people don't realise, the proliferation of languages that are spoken in Australia, but that is our national broadcaster who carries them, and they can really only allocate a couple of hours a week to some of them. And some of them, of course, get taken off regularly when it's decided, for whatever reason, we've got to support these new and emerging. There are a lot of African languages that are coming on. There's heaps, I think, that have come on in the last two sets of census that have been done by SBS. But that comes at the expense of other languages as well. Now, your point is well made. We've got people who come from different backgrounds. They came in that big wave of migration, including Hungarian, including Maltese, Italian, and so forth. There needs to be some outlet to preserve their language and their heritage as well. And where else are you going to do that? So I fully understand what you're saying, because whilst our national broadcaster, the SBS, has that remit, they've only got so much space, they've only got so much time, and they've only got so much budget as well. So there is a hunger for these various languages who might be described as some of the older and more established migrant communities to have a voice. And I think it's imperative that community television still be one of those outlets where that content can be created and shared.
Just have a couple more quick questions, and then there will be a chance to chat with Michelle as well at the end. So we'll just try and get round. Kashani first from C31.
Hello. So this has kind of been touched on a couple of times about the local content. And I guess really it's with the recent news points where both Stan and Netflix have outright said, we're not going to produce it. And they're pushing back on that idea that the government has put forward. I guess ultimately the question would be, with the recent media reform changes potentially affecting local content quotas for free-to-air television, do you see community TV's role in ensuring local voice being represented is on our screens being an important one moving into the next decade?
Oh, I absolutely do. Absolutely. And I think more than ever, as we look at these content conversations that are going on, and there is clearly from some elements of the sector, trying to get rid of some of that regulation which is seen as burdensome and so forth. You need to, as I said, remember we've got some overarching principles for broadcasters, and broadcasters are in a very privileged position. The right to use the scarce resource, spectrum that is used but not consumed, that is actually, it's a privilege. It's a real privilege. And I think that privilege, of course, belongs to the Australian people. And I honestly believe that, if we don't have these avenues for content in community television, then we will gradually, mightn't see it overnight, but in some cases you do when, you know, some of these channels unfortunately, you know, just go off the air. You won't see it overnight, but over time you will see that sort of creeping, you know, I'm loath to just say Americanism, but, you know, that's primarily where we can, you know, from where we derive most of the content that's not Australian on our screens. But the opportunity to tell Australian stories, the opportunity for people to, you know, report current affairs, the opportunity for people from different backgrounds to actually maintain their multiculturalism. So, yeah, short answer is absolutely.
Yeah, we've been producing a television show here on Channel 31 now for a long, long time. We're in our 21st year this year, and for the 20 of those years, I mean, it's been a massive struggle every single year. We get through, and ultimately, somewhere along the track, we do find a sponsor. We find some way of pulling it together. This year, we've moved online. As per the Great Leap Forward, and we can see enormous benefits online. Ultimately, online is the future. I mean, whether it's within the next 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, ultimately it will be online. But the problem is, what we've sort of raised with the critics of Channel 31 is, you know, what part of the words community and television don't you understand in the phrase community television? Because the program we are now doing this year online has to be radically different in its content from what we've been doing for the last 20 years. Because simply to survive, we can't focus on the motorsport scene of Melbourne and Geelong anymore, because we now have to appeal to the people in Sydney and Brisbane and New Zealand, right across the world. We cover through RMIT TV. We cover something called Formula SAE. We have 48% of our viewership for that live stream is international. So that's moving it all around the world, but that's fine. That's an international competition. We've got no opportunity if Channel 31 disappears off the air, because now we just can't find sponsors anymore, because the locals are saying, look, we don't need to talk, local business is saying, we don't need to talk to Sydney, we don't need to talk to New Zealand. There's also the problem, and this is the Pandora's box, is the whole question about laws and rules and regulation. Because we being a news program, we work under the Australian Copyright Act, which allows certain amounts of fair use of certain content. That doesn't apply. We are constantly getting, like last week, we got pulled off the air in New Zealand. Because, oh no, we own that, and we've gone back to them and said, yes, but under section, so they said, yeah, that's section 27 of the Australian Act. That doesn't apply here, that doesn't apply in Germany. So for producers, you know, it's an absolute nightmare in terms of, we own the right, we actually have permission from Red Bull to use their content. They supplied the content. We have permission from Supercars to use, say, the Bathurst 1000 footage as part of our news. Speed TV in America says, no, we own that, and now you're in. And we're just volunteers. So it's this huge, complex thing that nobody's sort of looking at. It's all very simple to say, hey, just go online. Not that it'd be lovely if it was that simple, but it's not that simple, and it won't be that simple until everybody gets together, until we're all working on the same sort of regulations, and that's probably never going to happen, because, you know, like when you're betting, you always jump on the horse called self-interest. Absolutely.
Well, so I've learnt a lot, even just from your comments there. I think that particularly your last point about copyright and fair use, I think there is a lack of understanding, a lack of appreciation. I mean, it's not like you've got the legal department of a free-to-air commercial network to guide you, even to question whether some of the notices that you might be given are accurate.
The situation we had 2 weeks ago was eventually it came out on our side. We went to, because we're going through YouTube, and this is the problem right now. The rules and regulations on both Facebook and YouTube in terms of what we can do with sponsorship, what we can do with content, change at the whim of Facebook and YouTube. So even if Channel 31 is ultimately, or even if, Australian community television, I think that's part of the problem, is that we've been looking at this very much out of our own self-interest, rather than looking at the broad. If we're going to do this, by all means go online, but let's have like the community television equivalent of a Netflix, of a proper OTT network that we have some control over, that we can set some regulations so the producers can go to potential sponsors and say, here's what we can give you, and this is going to apply for the next however long. Right now we're going out and saying to sponsors, this is what we can do this week, but we don't know what's going to happen next week. And since we started, there's already been 2 changes in the regulations as to what we can do.
Firstly, I take my hat off to you. 20 years of producing that content, but I think you've driven home for me very powerfully. It's that uncertainty, but also it seems to be a lack of overall support in assisting you to, firstly to create a structure. A structure that's viable, but also understanding how much you're a small person having to deal with some of these multinational companies, and when you have that sort of power imbalance, it's not like you can negotiate the terms and conditions of access to YouTube or anything else, that sort of use.
Access to some of those events now, in terms of things that we've had media accreditation to for the past 20 years. This year, it's been, I'm sorry, we can't give you media accreditation anymore. You're not a real television show.
Right, and that that's been driven by that uncertainty as well, Sue.
Just another question from Facebook. Another one from Warren from WTV. He asks, could community television have a national broadcast channel, possibly with the ABC or SBS, so that it could engage with regional and remote communities?
Look, it's an interesting proposal that Warren makes for 2 reasons. Firstly, because even hearing the feedback here tonight, it's clearly important. Community TV is clearly important in those regional areas, and one of the reasons why we're not reaching and it's lack of accessibility in those regional areas is the lack of internet connectivity, and it's that ubiquitous free platform that people rely on. So that's the first point I would note. I would be reluctant to, as I said earlier in response to the question, I would be reluctant to pursue an option which would see our public broadcasters losing out. I think we need to recognise that all those pillars of players, they're all complementary to one another. But I think it would be worthwhile for me to continue the discussion with Warren directly as well, because some of what I'm hearing here demonstrates that just as our public broadcasters are valued because they have certain charters and they fulfil certain obligations, it's clear that community TV is not being seen and valued in that respect. So I think the question becomes, how do we get that value back?
Michelle, you have been very generous with your time, and we are running over a little, so I'll throw to John Worcester for one final question, and then we'll go to Mike, who can wind up and thank you. So, John.
Thanks, Brendan. John Worcester. I've been very active in community radio for 42 years and in community TV since before we started transmitting, and I'm currently Deputy Chair. One of my concerns is the government approaches, both Liberal and Labor governments, really have not been, don't seem to have valued what we do. One of the previous communications ministers, which was Malcolm Turnbull, we were not happy with. He was absolutely convinced we should not be on free to air and off on to the on the internet. And your predecessor, Jason Clare, took the same line completely. So I've got to say, so far you're a breath of fresh air, and it's good to get that approach. Because if we're not valued by government, then we're not really going to get much in the way of assistance, especially when we struggle. And we have struggled with these constant renewals of our temporary transmission licence, And that's grossly unfair. Sometimes it's happened 2 days before it was meant to run out.
Yes.
And we were assured by people in the department, no, there's no way we're going to renew it. And then suddenly they do. At least we seem to be going a bit longer at the moment, thanks to, I think, some senators. And we regret we've lost Scott Ludlam, who was a parliamentarian who, better than any other one, seemed to understand community broadcasting. I don't know whether he'll be back, I don't know. So yeah, that's a real problem. But what we really need is our broadcasting licence goes to 2019, and really these constant extensions of the transmission licence should be, at the very least, go through to 2019. And we would be much appreciative. It would give us certainty.
Yes. No, I completely understand, and yeah.
So keep up your good work.
No, absolutely. I really don't have a response to that other than to say, look, what you've just said is probably exactly what I requested of the Minister when I formally wrote to him about this and also spoke in Parliament not too long ago. And I can assure you that there are a lot of people on the Labor side of politics who do value community television. I think one of the points I'm taking from this forum is we need to let you know a bit more. We need to let you know a bit more that we're valued. We also have quite a few people who have, large social media followings. I think it's incumbent on us to promote community television wherever possible as well. So, and thank you also for your long and ongoing service to the sector.
It's been great.
I think on behalf of all the members of the Channel 31 family, Michelle, we would love to thank you, not only because you enthusiastically accepted our invitation to come and talk to us, but when I asked you, we scheduled 1 hour, you said, I'll stay for as long as you want me. That's another indication of a person that has been a volunteer like us. And this is where the empathy comes from. She had the Shadow Ministry of Multiculturalism. So some of the questions we asked about cultural diversity were understood very quickly. So we appreciate having members in Parliament that really understand what the community and those who elected them want them to do. So thank you very much. Hopefully you will surprise us sometime in the new year with a position paper that makes it crystal clear that you cannot support community broadcasting by supporting just community radio. You need to do both. We're very supportive of what the government has done for community radio. We wanted to consider the other side of community broadcasting, community television. Thank you very much, Michelle, and all the best tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
And just finally, to wind up, I'd like to thank the volunteers, both here and back at base, that have given their time tonight to take this live to the world via Facebook. So thank you. Cheers. And stick around for a drink.